Me and my pro Nuzlocker buddies DRXX and Moxie got together to work on a tier list for all the new Pokemon introduced in Generation 9. This list is made with the hardcore Nuzlocke rule set in mind, and it doesn't include legendaries or paradox Pokemon. Which of these Pokemon are so bad they're basically unusable in a Nuzlocke, and which of these Pokemon are so good that we deem them ban-worthy for Nuzlockes. Let's start down in F tier, which is reserved for only the Pokemon that I could not find a single use for in the entire game. I'm gonna say it right away, it's pretty crazy how strong this new generation is, which is evidenced also by the fact that there's only one single Pokemon down in F tier, and this Pokemon is Trio. Copying Dugtrio's glass cannon base stats simply does not work for a water type. At this point, it gets simply outclassed by every other water type in the game. It's too frail, its move pool is extremely lackluster, its ability doesn't fit its class as an aggressive fast attacker at all, it's just a confusing mess of a Pokemon. And while Triple Dive is a great move, water simply isn't good enough of an offensive typing. Its Cantonian cousin is already not amazing in Nuzlocke, but it completely outshines it here. Let's move on to C tier, where at the very bottom we find the objectively ugliest Pokemon of this generation, Spidops. Spidops sports some terrible stats for a fully evolved Pokemon, as well as a very underwhelming move pool and the worst single typing in the game. It is, however, redeemed by one fact. Its pre-evolution Tarantula evolves incredibly early. Level 15 is within the level cap of the first gym leader, Katie. Spidops can help out a ton on the otherwise kind of tricky Gym 1 and Gym 2, and makes for a pretty decent early game Pokemon. After defeating Brassius, however, this 3D rendering of a child's drawing of what a Spider-Man might look like is probably best put in the box for the rest of the run unless you have a strat that really requires a sacrifice. Up next in C tier is 3 Psychic types, which all hold the same spot in C tier for, well, being a Psychic type. I've recently been of the opinion that Psychic types are incredibly overrated in Nuzlocke. The offensive type matchups they provide seldom provide a lot of value, while their weaknesses can be devastating. The 3 Pokemon are Rapska, Espathra, and Veluza. Rapska is super slow, Espathra does not do enough damage to justify its fragility, and Veluza is so unbelievably underwhelming compared to every other water type in the game. None of these Pokemon get any exciting moves or provide any significant value on any of the important boss fights in Scarlet and Violet, which is why this array of Psychic types is C tier. Grafify, while having an interesting ability, just gets completely undermined by a terrible typing and middling move pool, giving it a spot in C tier. Squawkabilly is up next, which is a pretty average normal flying type. It does get access to the very cool Aerial Ace plus Hustle combo. It seems like one of the best Pokemon for Gym 2, but afterwards I think it will just fall off plus ratio. C tier is also home to Pokemon that are useful in theory, but are just obtained too late to really show any of their potential. And one of those Pokemon is Tatsugiri. Water Dragon is a fantastic type, and this is a lot of special attack, but by the time your level cap allows you to catch this little guy, there's just not really any fights it can be useful on anymore. Also down in C tier is a Pokemon so good in competitive singles that it was banned from the premier singles format Smogon OU, Houndstone. While Ghost types are great in Nuzlocke, this Pokemon's signature move Last Respects, which powers up for every fainted ally, is just not made for a challenge run where you're trying to avoid losing Pokemon. Sure, you could construct a sweep on a fight where you sacrifice like 4 Pokemon and then take out an enemy team with Choice Scarf Last Respects, but how often are you realistically doing this in a Nuzlocke? The rest of its move pool is just straight up lacking, so I don't really see this being useful anywhere. Bombirdier is a Pokemon I initially didn't see myself ranking this low. Dark types are pretty damn good in this game, and its stats are great. However, not learning a good Dark move until level 53 really holds this guy back. The final C tier slot goes to what is, in my opinion, the most overrated Pokemon this generation, Maushold. I've had this Pokemon in 2 different Nuzlocke runs and never found a single reason to get it out of the box. Sure, Population Bomb is an insane move, with Wide Lens especially, but Maushold learns it at level 53, making it essentially only usable for everything from the Elite Four onwards. Sure, it can take out some Pokemon here, but your options in terms of good Pokemon are so insanely good at this point that Maushold just takes a backseat. Moving on from the niche or only good on paper Pokemon from C tier into the solid mons that actually do something, B tier. Starting off at the bottom of B tier, we have Cloth. You can get this guy super early, and tanky rock types are always appreciated in an early game. He has great stats, and half of the time will have Shell Armor, one of the best abilities in the game specifically for Nuzlocking. His other ability, Anger Shell, can be a downside sometimes, but it's also pretty strong and helps Cloth scale into mid-game and late game a little bit more. It is, however, still just a pure rock type, and the other moves it gets aren't super great, so that's why it's down here. Bellybolt is also in B tier, and while pretty slow, sports some great bulk and damage output, which should help you 1v1 a ton of random gym leader Pokemon. While nothing insane, Electromorphosis is a nice boost to its damage as well. Darkspun fills a unique niche as one of the only usable mid-game fairy types here. This thing has a wild stat spread, but overall early access to Play Rough makes this pretty passable as a fast and bulky Pokemon for simple 1v1 combat. B tier is also home of a Pokemon I initially thought was pretty crazy, Glamora. For those keeping score at home, half of Champion Gita's team has officially been ranked B tier or below, by the way. Glamora is a fantastic Pokemon in competitive singles, but hazards are just not great in Nuzlocke at all, as the AI never just switches around. Unless you're specifically running a full stall team, Glamora just fails to find a good niche in any important fight. I got this as an encounter in my winning attempt and just never found a use for it. Next up is the lowest ranked starter on the list, Quaquavel. Being a water type outside of specific Titan fights is just not very beneficial in Scarlet and Violet. Quaxley sweeps the first gym with Work Up and Wing Attack, but falls off pretty steadily afterwards, and it's always just kinda okay. Additionally, picking Quaxley prevents you from picking the other two starters, which are both much better. Oink alone steps into B tier as a fantastic early to mid-game encounter. Its early evolution gives it some fantastic stats for that point in the game. Additionally, it's specifically very useful for Iona, one of the hardest fights in the game, as its bulk and ghost immunity allow it to reliably counter the VTuber's Mismagius. Toadskrull is a great defensive Pokemon, but let's be honest, these stats are worn much better by its water poison type counterpart. Not being able to utilize its great speed stat with Spore makes him nothing but okay. Higher up in B tier is Farigiraffe, who separates himself from the C tier psychic types with a ghost immunity, a solid Nuzlocking stat spread, and potential for a great defensive ability in Kudchu. Bramblegast rolls into B tier next. You can get and evolve this Pokemon extremely early and it annihilates the water gym. Not the hardest by any means, but having such a favorable matchup is awesome. In addition, Bramblegast does a ton of work on Rika as well as the champion, making it a big contender for your Elite Four team. It's a bit of a niche pick, but keep an eye out for this Fierce Bush. Just like I'll be keeping an eye out for my Fierce Bush with the sponsor of this video, Manscaped. If you're still looking for a gift for the holiday seasons or are looking to treat yourself into the new year, Manscaped has got you covered. They provide the best tools for your jewels. Grooming in the downstairs area is always kind of an uncomfortable thing to think about, but not with Manscaped anymore, because of what comes in the Holiday Package 4.0. The star of the show here is obviously the Lawnmower 4.0. I love this thing. It's waterproof, you can use it in the shower, it's got a little LED light in the front. This is skin safe, I've been using this for over a year. I've never even come close to injuring myself. The package as well comes with the super comfortable Manscaped boxers. You've got the Crop Preserver deodorant, you've got the Crop Reviver spray, and in addition, you have the Manscaped Weed Whacker, which is used specifically to groom your nose hair if you have a lot of that going on. The box makes a perfect gift for the holiday season. You get 20% off with my link in the description. Thank you so much for Manscaped for sponsoring this video. Let's get back into B tier. Reverum is a little held back by its terrible offensive typing, but it's still a threat to be reckoned with, because Shift Gear allows it to set up and take kills in at least a few fights. A main characteristic of Pokemon in higher B tier is blobs of stats that just kind of do well in most 1v1 fights, but don't really have a specific niche to shine in. And a prime example of that is Dunsparce. Great Pokemon, great stats, amazing shitpost of a design, just nothing it really does exceptionally well. Topping out at B tier, we have Mabostiff. As I said, dark types are great in this game. They have amazing type matchups in late game, and Mabostiff can carry with great offensive power, great bulk without paying too much in its speed stat, and it gets access to the best common Nuzlocke ability, which is Intimidate. Okay, time for the good stuff. Welcome to A tier. Lowcakes is the first Pokemon here. I love this Pokemon. It's a real sleeper pick this generation. Like I said, dark types have some fantastic matchups in Paldea, and Lowcakes delivers exactly what you need from a dark type. It does fantastic work on Rhyme and Tulip, it's a level 24 evolution so you get to use it extremely early, and it's a great pivot with U-turn and First Impression. Arboliva sports some pretty great stats to make up for its bad typing. I don't see this Pokemon making it onto every team, but if you're running a more defensive or straight up stall composition, this is probably the best leech seed user in the game. This game seems to have pretty great new grass types because there's another one right up here in A tier, and it's our spicy friend, Scovillain. Sitting on the exact opposite of the stall versus aggro spectrum from Arboliva, Scovillain delivers on what everyone hoped a fire grass type would excel at, Sunstrats. Access to Chlorophyll as well as Sunny Day Solar Beam as early as Kofu's Gym, Scovillain can do a ton of damage by sweeping various teams with sun-boosted solar beams and flamethrowers. Terrestrialize is also incredibly useful on these offensive sweepers because you can shore up some of their weaknesses and boost their damage at the same time. Pawmot is one of those Pokemon that's just incredible because of how early you gain access to it. Doing some running with this will give you access to some fantastic offensive stats and typing as early as level 19, which is just after the Brassius cap. The Gen 9 Pika-Clone scales pretty damn well into late game too, with its Volt Switch pivots and devastating close combats. Also in A tier, for its ability to carry the early game, we find Clodsire. The biggest reason this Pokemon is so high is because it is the single best counter to Iono in the game and will ensure that any run that has it will make it to mid-game. It does fall off a bit later, but beating one of the biggest encounter checks in the game is so damn good. Next we have what I believe to be the best pivot in the game in Kilowattrel. Evolving after the Iono cap is, as the kids say, an L, but goddamn does this Pokemon have potential. In Nuzlocke, what is described as a pivot is typically a class of support Pokemon that can help your other Pokemon have an easier time switching in. They switch in on a resist or immune move, and then switch back out to bait a different type of move that will do less damage to the Pokemon that you actually want to get in. The more aggressive your team is, the more useful a pivot will be, and I believe aggressive teams to be the premier archetype for this game. No matter the ability, your Kilowatt roll will have 2 immunities as well as incredibly fast Volt switches, making it perfect for the pivot roll. The way that Dondozo plays reminds me a lot of Snorlax, and I think it functions in a pretty similar way in Nuzlocke's. Unbelievable HP stat, great defensive typing, lots of physical damage output. Make it physically instead of specially defensive, and you have a pretty damn good A tier Pokemon. This would certainly be higher on the list if it were available any earlier. Paldean Tauros is basically just a better version of Tauros in every way, except compared to other vanilla games, you can get this insanely early, like after the second gym. These stats are insane for a Pokemon at this point, and it even gets Intimidate. It falls off a bit, but not nearly as much as other early game powerhouses. The second best starter in the game awaits us in the upper half of A tier. Meowscarada has some great offensive stats, and it's incredibly fast. What really makes it shine though is its move pool. Play Rough, U-Turn, Acrobatics, Hone Claws, as well as the signature move Flower Trick are fantastic options. It's a Dark type, which as we previously discussed is great in this game, and you can remove its Dark type weaknesses and increase its damage even more by terrestrializing it. It starts off a bit weak in my opinion, but once you get the final evolution, Meowscarada can probably be on most teams that you use throughout the game. I never thought I would say this, but Game Freak somehow made the worst type in the game amazing. The days of this type holding back your Nuzlocks are finally over. The Ice Age has begun. Welcome to A tier, Cetitan, and pChal. These Pokemon stats are unreal. I just have to put them on the screen here, and I think it kind of speaks for itself. Both of these will easily sweep the Dragon-type Elite Four member, and then some, making it must-brings for your Pokemon League team. Cetitan's bulk is crazy, pChal's Glaive Rush is insane. There's only one thing that holds these back from being placed even higher. It's that you obtain them so late in the game that catching them will not significantly increase your win rate on average, because if you've made it to that point in the game, you've probably already reached critical mass on encounters. Another often overlooked type got done right this generation, and it's the Rock type. Nacli and its evolutions are without a doubt the strongest early game rock types that Game Freak has ever designed. Both their abilities are fantastic, their move pool is great, Salt Cure is broken early game, Knucklestack does incredibly well against Iono, and Gargarnicle's stat spread is ridiculous. If you're running a stall team in this game, it's probably because you caught this guy. Getting closer and closer to S tier, at the top of A tier, we find the best early game encounter in the game, as well as, in my opinion, just the coolest design in this generation, and that's Flamigo. There's a reason the two most successful speedrunning strategies in this game right now revolve around catching this or Hawlucha as early as possible, and that's because Flying Fighting is an unbelievably good offensive typing. What makes this even better is as soon as you pick this up in the early game, you already have access to the Acrobatics TM as well. Flamigo even scales into the late game a bit with these stats and this move pool. It even gets access to Scrappy for Rhyme. But the top of A tier is dominated by a single type. Still to this day, the best Nuzlocking type in the game, Steel. Goddamn, Steel types are so good this time around. First off, we have Ortho Worm. Absorb abilities are already incredibly broken in Nuzlocke. Having a defensive beast like this be able to heal itself on a switch in with Earth Eater is completely crazy. This finds a place on pretty much every single team that needs to defend against a physical attacker. Held back by the fact that you're only going to use it late game is Kingambit. While its abilities and signature move aren't super useful for Nuzlocking purposes, this Pokemon just kind of brute forces its way into the top of A tier with its ridiculous stats and Steel typing. It's just a premier Pokemon for the Elite Four. There's only one Pokemon that's higher than that in A tier, and that's Tinkaton. Tinkaton is a Fairy Steel type, which is just fucking ridiculous. Its signature move, Gigaton Hammer, has 160 base power, which is insane. You can't use the move 2 turns in a row, but you can just protect between each use, and the AI can't abuse that like a human might be able to. Maybe equip this with leftovers, get some leftovers in between the turns as well. This thing is insane. It's so bulky, it does so much damage, it's pretty fast too, and yeah, crazy typing. And with that, let's get into S tier. Pokemon that are so good, they will solo carry your run. I think every single Pokemon in this tier is bannable, and there's 5 of them, which really goes to show how crazy the power creep is this generation. The first Pokemon in S tier is Cyclizar. Cyclizar starts off as an incredible early game encounter. Dragon types early game are always pretty damn useful, and its stats, ability, and move pool are really solid for being available like before the 3rd gym. This alone would probably be enough to put it into A tier, but the crazy thing is Cyclizar, it fills like 2 more roles as you go through the game. At level 40 it learns Shift Gear, meaning you can turn it into a crazy sweeper, but that's still not its best role. Cyclizar's signature move, Shed Tail, is what turns it into probably the best support Pokemon Game Freak has ever made for Nuzlockers. Shed Tail creates a substitute and then switches Cyclizar out, passing that substitute to the incoming Pokemon. This on its face is basically already a free switch to any Pokemon you want without having to think about taking an incoming move. This provides unbelievable tempo to aggressive teams, which I mentioned earlier I believe to be the best archetype in the game. The strategies, though, don't really even end there. If you want to get really crazy, you can equip Cyclozar with one of the EV training power items from Misagosa, which reduces its speed in the battle. This means it'll probably go after its opponent using the substitute after it gets hit, meaning the Pokemon you're switching in with Shed-Tail has a free setup turn no matter what. Add to that the AI still can't really play against Substitute, it likes using status moves into it and stuff like that, and that means that you probably have more than one free turn every time you use Cyclozar. It's not super trivial to utilize, but the potential is absolutely stellar here. The next S tier entry might not be available at all for you, depending on how you do your encounter rulings, but its pre-evolution is technically an encounter on most routes. It's G-Hole Denjo. Steel Ghost is arguably the best defensive typing in the game. Being immune to all status moves because its ability is completely insane. It gets Recover, it gets Nasty Plot in late game, it learns like half the TMs in the game, its stat spread is crazy. Like I can't imagine a single fight where this Pokemon isn't useful. But all that is completely amplified and shot up into S tier by the fact that technically you can catch and evolve this as early as you want, as long as you have access to a Gimidule. Another completely broken ghost type that you can get way too early is Annihilape. Let me put it this way, if Primeape just got a secondary ghost typing and like a decent physical ghost type move, it would probably already be an A tier Pokemon. Ghost fighting is such a ridiculously good offensive combination, it covers like everything. But that's absolutely not all that Annihilate gets. It gets more offense, it gets a ton of bulk, and it gets one of the craziest moves ever introduced in Pokemon, Rage Fist. Rage Fist starts out as a 50 base power physical ghost type move, but every time Annihilate gets hit, Rage Fist increases its power by 50 base power, meaning if you get hit twice, you already have a ghost type Giga Impact with no drawback. The craziest thing is that these boosts persist after you switch out, which is so overpowered that I genuinely think this is an unintended oversight by Game Freak. But would you believe this isn't even the most broken ghost type in all of Paldea? We'll get back to that later, because first we have to talk about Palafin. What can I even say about this Pokemon that hasn't been said yet? This is yet another Pokemon that can be encountered and evolved way too early. Its ability is 0 to Hero, which basically means if you switch it out once and then you switch it back in, your Palafin will go into Hero mode and have the stats of a legendary Pokemon. And guess what? Switching and switching back is really easy in Nuzlocke if you know how to pivot. It can even switch using Flip Turn, it gets Bulk Up, it gets Drain Punch, it gets Jet Punch, which is just an even better Aqua Jet. Palafin probably solos like every fight in the game where he doesn't have a clear type advantage. Absolutely broken. But I still think there's one more Pokemon that is even more game-breaking than that. You already know what's coming, I'll just rip the band-aid off. The best Gen 9 Pokemon, in my humble opinion, is Skeledirge. I've already talked how broken this Pokemon is in the specific context of this game in my Deathless Hardcore Nuzlocke video, so I'll just give you the very basic gist. It doesn't have the stats of a Palafin Hero form or even a Goldengo, but its offensive type matchups just line up so perfectly with what the game needs you to beat. The biggest thing here is obviously Torch Song, its signature move, which is basically almost a flamethrower that always raises your special attack. You can set up on the enemy while killing their Pokemon. You can even make up for its mediocre speed stat with a Choice Scarf, EVs, or Nature Mints. Skeledirge in its pre-evolution sweep Gym 1, Gym 2, Gym 6, Gym 7, Gym 8, an Elite 4 member, the Champion, Clavel, and even gets a double kill on the first 2 turns of the final Professor fight. The fact that this is a guaranteed encounter, and it stays relevant throughout the entire game, sweeping so many important fights, is why I think Skeledirge is not just the best starter ever made, but the best Gen 9 Pokemon. Huge shout out to Nuzlocker's Moxie and DRXX, they helped me a lot with this tier list and their channels are down in the description. Was there any Pokemon that you felt was out of place here? I'll never read a single comment on any of my YouTube videos, so make sure to let me know down below.